What's going on, everybody? Kalipus Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be doing a quick comparison between the Motorola Moto G Power 5G and the Samsung Galaxy A33 5G. Now, as always, if you do end up wanting to learn more about either phone individually, definitely check out the description, where I am linking to several other videos about them, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. So with the Moto G Power 5G, we're getting a 6.5-inch 120Hz IPS LCD display with a 1080p resolution, a PPI of 405, and a 20:9 aspect ratio. With the Samsung Galaxy A33 5G, we're getting a 6.4-inch 90Hz Super AMOLED display. This phone also has a 1080p resolution, a PPI of 411, and a 20:9 aspect ratio as well. So in a lot of ways, these displays are pretty similar, but on one hand, with the Moto G Power 5G, at again 6.5 inches versus 6.4 with the A33 5G, the Moto G Power is a little bit larger, so if you're going to be on your phone a bit more doing stuff like reading, for example, where you want things to be a bit larger and easier to see, then the Moto G Power 5G will have a slight advantage, but in general, I feel like the size is pretty similar, so it's not going to be that much of a difference. In addition to this, at 120Hz versus 90Hz with the A33 5G, the Moto G Power 5G also has a slightly higher refresh rate, which in turn is going to make the Moto G Power 5G feel a bit more premium to use. But again, the difference is really not that huge, and at 90Hz, the A33 5G still has an above average refresh rate anyway, so again, more of a subtle difference. On the other hand though, with the A33 5G, again, this phone does have a Super AMOLED display versus an IPS LCD with the Moto G Power 5G, and while on one hand, an IPS LCD is definitely not bad. In fact, in this price range, I want to say the vast majority of phones have this same display technology, so again, definitely not bad. But with the A33 5G, a Super AMOLED is going to make the colors look a bit nicer. The display in general is a bit brighter, and the viewing angles, as you can see, are quite a bit better here. So if you're outside in the sun, for example, or really in any kind of bright area, the A33 5G is going to be a bit easier to see. But in general, despite their differences, if you are looking for a phone that has a nice display for consuming content, you're really not going to go wrong with either phone here. Now for storage, with the Moto G Power 5G, we're getting 256GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, and with the A33 5G, we're getting 128GB with microSD card expansion as well. But keep in mind, this phone also has another variant with 256, so despite in this specific comparison, the Moto G Power 5G of course does have an advantage. Just keep in mind, if you really want 256, with the A33 5G, you can still get it. But in general, both phones have plenty of storage. I feel like for the average user, even 128 is going to be plenty of storage for most people. So no matter what, if you're looking for a more affordable 5G phone that has a lot of storage, either phone here will be a good choice. For security features, both phones have Face Unlock, and they both have fingerprint scanners too, so definitely nice to get multiple options besides a pin to unlock the phones. But with the Moto G Power 5G, the fingerprint scanner is right here on the power key, and with the Samsung Galaxy A33 5G, it's in the display. But starting with the Moto G Power 5G, let's try them out. There we go, one more time. And there we go. And now for the Samsung. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see, both fingerprint scanners worked real well, no issues at all. And again, remember, both phones have Face Unlock too, so if you want to use that instead, you always can. Now taking a look at the camera setups here, with the Moto G Power 5G, up front, we got a 16MP selfie camera. Then on the back, we got a triple camera setup with a 50MP main camera, a 2MP depth sensing camera, and a 2MP macro camera. For video, this phone has a max recording quality of 1080p in both the rear and front cameras. So unfortunately, no 4K here, but considering this is more of an entry-level device, I wasn't really expecting it anyway. With the Samsung Galaxy A33 5G, up front, we got a 13MP selfie camera. Then on the back, we got a quad camera setup with a 48MP main camera, an 8MP ultra-wide camera, a 2MP depth sensing camera, and a 5MP macro camera. And then for video, this phone can actually record 4K videos in both the rear and front cameras, so definitely great to see, especially considering this phone is pretty much the same price as the Moto G Power 5G. So if you are recording a lot of videos and maybe you want the option to record in a higher resolution, then in that case, the A33 5G will be a great choice. And again, this phone does have an ultra-wide camera too, whereas again, unfortunately, the Moto G Power 5G, despite at least having a macro camera, doesn't have an ultra-wide camera. So if you want that feature too, then again, the A33 5G will have an advantage. Now to give you an idea of what they can do, here's some side-by-side pictures taken with each phone. In general, I feel like for the average user, either phone here is going to be perfectly fine. Now, when it comes to which one is better between the two, the pictures are right here, so I'll let you decide that for yourself. But again, overall, I feel like for the average user, for things people typically use smartphone cameras for, like social media like Instagram for example, or maybe sending photos to friends and family, or maybe you're on vacation taking pictures for your own memories, no matter what, I feel like either phone here will get the job done just fine, and this really goes to show if you want to take nice pictures features for personal use, you definitely don't have to go spend $1,000 on a super high-end phone. You can simply get something more affordable like these, and for the most part they will get the job done just fine. Now of course, if you're gonna be taking pictures all the time and that's really one of the main things you're doing with your phone, then in that case, depending on how important it is to you, you could probably justify spending a bit more and getting something higher end. But again, for the average user, I do think either phone here will be perfectly fine. So in general, as far as the cameras go, between the two it really comes down to what kind of features you want, because on one hand, if you don't really need a lot, maybe you're just taking normal photos and using portrait mode and maybe not recording a ton of videos, in that case, the Moto G Power 5G is really all you're gonna need. But if you want an ultra-wide camera and maybe you want to record 4K videos too, then in that case, the A33 5G will be a better choice. Now when it comes to RAM and processor, with the Moto G Power 5G, we're getting 6GB of RAM with the MediaTek Dimensity 930 processor. With the A33 5G, we're getting 6GB of RAM here as well, with the Samsung Exynos 1280. So in general, when it comes to performance, both phones are pretty good for what they are, considering these are more affordable mid-range devices. Definitely don't get them expecting like flagship level performance, but at the same time, again, for what they are, the performance is pretty good, and for average daily use, stuff like social media, web browsing, streaming content like videos and music, and maybe some light mobile gaming, for things like that, either phone will get the job done just fine. But I will say between the two, the Moto G Power 5G is a little bit faster. Now, not really by a whole lot, so definitely don't expect like a night and day kind of difference. It's not like the Moto G Power 5G is super fast and the A33 5G is super slow. Definitely nothing like that, but at the same time, if you do want the faster phone between the two, I would go with the Moto G Power 5G. Now I did run a benchmark test on each phone using Geekbench 6, and here are the results I got. So again, as you can see here, on one hand, there's really not a huge difference. So when it comes to performance, the phones are really going to be in the same ballpark. But at the same time, the Moto G Power 5G is a tiny bit faster, and in my experience, things have been a little bit smoother on this phone. So again, if performance is really a main priority for you, definitely keep this in mind. But in general, if you do end up with the A33 5G, again, as far as performance goes between the two, you're really not going to miss out on a whole lot. For the batteries, both phones here have 5000 mAh batteries, with the Moto G Power 5G supporting 15W fast charging, and the Samsung Galaxy A33 5G supporting 25. So of course, when it comes to charging speed, the A33 5G will have an advantage, but keep in mind, to fully utilize this fast charging, you will need a 25W charger, which this phone does not have. In fact, keep in mind, with the A33 5G, you're not even going to get a wall adapter, so if you don't have one, definitely be prepared to get one. On the other hand, with the Moto G Power 5G, the charging speed is pretty decent, but keep in mind, even with 15W fast charging, you will need a 15W charger, of course, which this phone doesn't have. Now, at least this phone does come with a wall adapter, but it's only 10 watts, so again, if you really want to maximize the charging speed with either phone, you will need a pretty good fast charger. But aside from this, with 5000 mAh batteries, you can't expect to get great battery life and longevity with either phone here, so if that is a priority for you, you're not going to go wrong either way. For the software, both phones here do have Android 13, but keep in mind with the Moto G Power 5G, or really any Motorola phone for that matter, Motorola's software support is, on one hand, getting better, but on the other hand, it's kind of unpredictable. So while I do think this phone will eventually get Android 14 after it comes out, I don't know how quickly it's going to happen, whereas with the Samsung Galaxy A33 5G, this phone got Android 13 pretty much right as it came out, and Samsung really has some of the best software support, so with the A33 5G, you can also expect to get Android 14, 15, and 16. So in general, if you do care about the software support, the A33 5G will have an advantage. But again, the Moto G Power 5G at least does have Android 13, and it's probably going to get 14 eventually, so you're really not going to go wrong with this phone either. When it comes to other features, unfortunately, the Moto G Power 5G does not have NFC, so if you like to use tap and pay, definitely keep this in mind. But on the other hand, the A33 5G does have NFC, and for the Motorola, I feel like this is really disappointing because at this point in 2023, pretty much every new 5G phone does have NFC at this point, and since tap and pay is becoming so popular and widely used, I feel like in this day and age, pretty much every phone should have it. So I don't really know why Motorola is so behind on this. But again, keep in mind, if you do like to use tap and pay, again, the A33 5G does have it. In addition to this, also keep in mind, unfortunately, the A33 5G does not have a headphone jack. So if you have a normal pair of 3.5mm headphones you want to use them with this phone, you will need an adapter. Whereas with the Moto G Power 5G, this phone does have a headphone jack, so you can use them like normal. But in conclusion, which of these phones is better? Now this is actually pretty close, and in a lot of ways, these phones are pretty much equal. When it comes to stuff like photo quality, I feel like it is roughly even here. The displays are also both really good. Both phones also have newer software, larger batteries, and plenty of storage. But I feel like in a couple ways, the Samsung Galaxy A33 5G does have a couple advantages. First of all, again, with the Super AMOLED, the image quality is going to be a bit better. So if you're going to be consuming a lot of content, doing stuff like watching videos, for example, where the image quality is a bit more important, despite the Moto G Power 5G having a slightly larger display, display. With a Super AMOLED, I feel like you're overall gonna get a better experience. Again, this phone also does have an ultra-wide camera and it can record 4K videos. So if you're gonna be using the camera a bit more, this is definitely something to think about. Again, this phone does have NFC, which I feel like for a lot of people, this is a pretty important feature. And I would say as a Samsung, the A33 5G does also have better software support. On the other hand though, with the Moto G Power 5G, again, the performance is a bit faster. And if you're not that concerned about software support, NFC, or the overall camera features, then in general, if you're looking for an affordable 5G phone, you're really not gonna go wrong with this phone either. But this concludes my comparison between the Motorola Moto G Power 5G and the Samsung Galaxy A33 5G. Again, if you want to learn more about either phone individually, definitely check out the description, where I am linking to several other videos about them, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalipis Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.